I am excited to be here, and I am excited to have a smaller group. So this is a time for me to kind of let spirit flow. So of course I have notes and a roadmap and all of that. But if something is bubbling forth for you, I invite you to bring it into this space because that's how my ministry is very flexible, very open, and inviting of what spirit is bringing forth for you. So if at any point in time there's an idea that is just so prevalent or a question or anything, I invite you to unmute and share. That's just how I roll, so I invite you to roll with. The topic for my talk this morning is the light of wisdom. And what happens, I think, in talks is when a minister is diving into material, that is what is fresh and changing and undone sometimes in them. So you guys are getting me as I prepare for a 12 Powers class that I'm teaching. And so it was wisdom that I was sinking into right as I was figuring out what I was speaking of. So this is part of that process for me. And I think what is so cool, especially growing up in Unity, is the 12 Powers have changed for me, but they haven't actually changed. That wisdom, how I understood it as a child in Unity and a teen in Unity and a Unity minister, it's all the same stuff, but my understanding is so much different. And I can imagine as each of us grow and as we have our insight and construction and deconstruction of our faith, it takes on a new meaning for us as well. So whatever your meaning and your understanding, I invite you to just honor where you are now. If there's new ideas, let them come forward. And if there's anything you're ready to release it. The piece of wisdom that I have always connected to is that it is innate in each of us. Just as in the absolute word this morning, it was talking about unending and timeless. Our 12 powers are innate in us, unending and timeless. But it didn't always feel that way for me, especially growing up in Unity, specifically with wisdom, that I felt like wisdom only came when you were old. You know, when you were this tall to ride the roller coaster, you got this much wisdom. And when you got this many gray hairs, you had this much wisdom. And so growing up in the Unity movement, I was always so excited to be older than I was because I wanted to have that wisdom. But it felt like I didn't have it, or I didn't have it enough, or I didn't know enough. And I was just a kid. And what did I know? I didn't have wisdom. Or so I thought, until my prayer chaplain growing up when I was probably 7 or 8, her name was Tish. And I was praying with Tish and I was asking for wisdom. That gosh darn it, I had things to say, but I didn't feel like anyone was listening to me. And I wanted my wisdom to be heard. And that was my prayer. And I so vividly remember it because Tish took my hand and looked me in the eyes and said, "You already have it. You are already wise beyond your years, wise beyond what your brain tells you. And that will never change." And so it was that moment for me of not only someone who was a wise spiritual teacher for me, validating my own wisdom, but it was also the reminder of, regardless of where we are, wisdom is ours. And some of it is our responsibility to express our wisdom. And other times it's our responsibility to keep our mouth shut when we're not coming from a place of wisdom. And so as we think about wisdom, the books that I'll be pulling from today are Power Up from Paul Hasselbeck and Cher Holton, as well as Divine Audacity from Linda Martella Whitsett. And what I love about these two authors and in conversation about the 12 powers is we're pulling from the foundation of specifically Charles Fillmore in his writings, but moving it into a contemporary space and even shifting it beyond what these books are talking about into a world of 2023 and beyond. And so when we look at wisdom in its definition, we know that wisdom is the ability to judge, evaluate, discern, be wise, appraise, and apply what is known. And Charles Fillmore says, judgment is a faculty of the mind that can be exercised in 2 ways, from sense perception or spiritual understanding. If it is action based on sense perception, it can be fallible. If based on spiritual understanding, then these are safe things to know. And I think what's so interesting about safe things to know is wisdom in its source, knowing that it is a 12 power of us that we have in connection with God, wisdom as an attribute of the divine is always good, because God is always good. Even though there's some times when you get a piece of knowledge that you wish you didn't know, that is not wisdom, because in no way can wisdom be against us, because wisdom is always for our best, always for our evolution, always for our next version of our spiritual selves living in this human world. And what I appreciate about Charles Fillmore is he never called it wisdom. It was judgment. Judgment was the 12th power for him. And I think judgment gets a bad rap. In the Power Up book, Cher Holton calls us judging machines as humans, because it's what we are. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think judgment can be able to support us in knowing what is ours. And Linda Martella Whitsett speaks to that beautifully. She says, the original name for the power of wisdom assigned by Charles Fillmore was judgment. The word judgment fell out of use during the late 20th century, however, because to judge smacked of judgmentalness and was confused with Bible liturgist's divine judgment. The dictionary definition of judgment perfectly describes the aspect of wisdom relating to sound judgment, including our capacity to assess or evaluate situations and reach conclusions. We judge every day. Charles Fillmore tells us judgment is the mental act of evaluating through comparison or contrast. It is fundamental to the decision-making process. As a mental skill, judging or evaluating is clarifying. She says, I am pretty sure I was born with a judging gene. From my earliest memories, I liked almost nothing better than to run a vertical line down the center of a blank piece of paper, labeling the top left column pro and the other column con. I used this technique for deciding which summer camp to attend, whether to break up with a boyfriend, and which job offer to accept. Doesn't seem so spiritual, does it? But I am certain it is spiritual. Every time I activate the power of wisdom by evaluating options, I have learned what has given life to my spirit. I learned to clarify my thoughts. I learned that all is right. And in fact, it is necessary for me to see that rightness in my choice. I learned I can trust myself and that I am wise. Also, I learned that the mental exercise of evaluating is not the only or final expression of wisdom in decision-making. Other factors come into play. And that is why wisdom or judgment shouldn't have a bad rap. And I think for me, the interesting piece of when we think about judgment is we don't feel like that's the spiritual thing if we're taking it at face level. The writing of Charles Fillmore has been taken through the lens of the writers that are putting his thoughts into, 2010 language when this was published, which now we're reading it in 2023 eyes. Very similar to how when we were talking about judgment in the Bible, sometimes Judgment Day, if that's what we understand through the ideas of what we can conceptualize as Judgment Day, that's very different than if you were a Hebrew hearing it at the feet of your teacher, talking about this ultimate day of judgment. And just like all of the 12 powers, there are so many aspects of it that we peel it back almost like an onion. And so the pieces that I want to sit with a little bit more today is when we talk about different aspects, wisdom and judgment, and we'll be bringing in discernment and intuition. I want to feel what that's like in our bodies. I want to figure out what we connect to, where our spaces maybe to grow, where are we considering our next step in our understanding. So just with sitting with wisdom and judgment as two concepts, as two words with our current understanding, what I'd like for you to do is just get comfortable in your space. And I want you to just feel what judgment feels like in your body. Figure out where you feel judgment. When I say that word, when you take on that energy, where does judgment sit in your body? What does it feel like? Where is it centered? Did any feeling or emotion or memory come up in relation to judgment? And now I invite you to ask those same questions about wisdom. In your body, what does wisdom feel like? Where do you feel wisdom? And when you're ready, I invite you to come back and just hold on. Kind of take note of what came up, where it came up, all of that, because what our bodies tell us is information. It's data pointing us to the direction of where we may have an expanded sense of a concept, or it may point us in the direction of there's work to be done here. And we're going to do that again with some other concepts of wisdom, just to be able to see what's alive in us, because that's what our body tells us is where are things alive? Where is our energy focused in this body that we are given in this world? The other pieces that I love pulling from divine audacity in regards to wisdom or judgment are discernment and intuition. And what I love about these concepts is that both of them in their own way are beyond the fact. Because I think when we are thinking about being spiritual people, living a spiritual experience created in a human world by humans, that second unity principle is so activated that we are fully human and fully divine, operating as such. And discernment and intuition for me are very, very intricately connected to my Christ consciousness, my groundedness, my support of source. And so taking discernment as a concept, it is defined by Linda Martella Whitsett is equating to judgment, but it's a particular kind of perception, sensing without judgment, really. Discernment is the ability not to rely upon facts, but based upon principles in decision making. In spiritual practice, discernment is exercised through a process that includes questioning, meditation, and even envisioning, while suspending judgment about any divine ideas that are generated. Spiritual communities follow discernment processes to determine communal values and priorities. Individuals practice discernment for self-discovery and ratification of their path ahead. Another practice of discernment is to allow question, space, and time to percolate underneath conscious thinking, allowing impressions, images, and meaning to arise naturally over time. The expression live in the question is a good way to describe this practice of discernment. And so how often do we say, barely have time to think? That means you barely have time to be wise. That means you have hardly any time to be discerning. But when we think about discernment as being the knowing of source beyond the fact, the suspending of judgment as an aspect of wisdom, what gifts can we uncover? What nuggets from spirit are theirs for us to find? It's almost as if discernment is the ultimate step in solving our own where's Waldo. Where is our Christ light? Where is our next path? Where is our future joy? That is the process of discernment to open us up to that answer, to point us on that path. But for me, that idea of suspending judgment is not easy, because that monkey mind is loud, and my judging self, my little me, my immature aspects of my spirituality can sometimes override my discernment process by saying, well, that's not possible, or that'll never happen, or I wouldn't even know where to start. Baby out with the bathwater when we let that come over, because that's not wisdom, because that's not pointing us at our ultimate good. Discernment is intricately connected to source tapping us, saying, are you ready to say yes? Are you ready to suspend judgment? Are you ready for that next step? And so I want us to ask the question again of what discernment feels like in our bodies. So wherever you are feel where discernment feels for you. If there's any image or memory that's related to discernment, let that bubble forth. And when you have felt where discernment lives for you, I invite you to come back. And I feel like discernment is cousins with intuition, because intuition is the last point to know without knowing how you even know this. That how many times have we been so in touch, so in sync, so grounded in the world of spirit, active, that we are seeing beyond the facts, but also making the choices that doesn't even feel like they were a choice. It was just always meant for us. The intuition of saying, I'm going to go this way today. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do that. All of these things are intuition, which in its essence is tapping into the oneness that we all are. In our connectedness with spirit, with each other, with the world, forces seen and unseen, all connected. And our intuition is saying, yes, I am part of it. And yes, I am listening. That intuition, in the words of Linda Martello Whitsett, she says, intuition is our aha and oh no power. Moment by moment, we have access to our internal guidance system. As we practice right judgment, evaluation, and discernment, we activate and become familiar with methods by which our infinite self takes charge to express wisely. We may see images, feel an electric charge, or hear a directive such as check the tires or walk away. We may suddenly, without contemplation, know what to do. One of the most frequent questions asked about our wisdom ability is, how can I tell whether my intuition is God or from my own human thought? Many answers have been given to this question. Mine is, if it leads me to a behavior that helps me sleep better at night, if it rises in purity rather than confusion of my feelings, chances are it's a wise course of action. Is it God? Is it me? Yes, it is. It is oneness. Cultivating an awareness of oneness, the truth of our divine identity is revealed. And so I think in my immature self, in my younger self, in my understanding of the world, in my 7-year-old brain, I was talking about knowledge in wisdom. I wasn't talking about wisdom or judgment or discernment or intuition in their purest form. And often I think we don't. And so in thinking about wisdom as this multidimensional, always available and innate power that we each have, we get to ask ourselves the question, where am I going with this? What part of my wisdom is activated? Am I being discerning? Am I tapping into intuition? Am I using judgment? And is that judgment based on my senses of the world and my humanness, or judgment from my Christ self? Because all of this is wisdom. And when there is a sense of all of these coming together, what good can we do in the world? Knowing that not only are we coming from a place of wisdom, but coming from a place of all of it gelling together. When intuition and discernment are the drivers of our lives, where are we going? Probably to an even cooler spot than we are now. And there is a piece that I invite you to just ask the question of in these coming weeks. When a thought comes into your head, to ask the question, is this coming from my mind? Is this coming from my wisdom? Is this coming from my discernment? Because when we get clear about where things are coming from, we can better be directed and what we want more of in our thought process. And as we know, in unity, our thoughts shape our world. But not only do our thoughts shape our world in the internal experience, but they shape the outer world. And what fires me up is knowing that there is change happening in our outer world. But that all starts when we ask the question, where is this coming from? And how can it be more coming from a place of deep and grounded wisdom and spirit?